Mr. Santiago Racca, how are you, sir?
I am doing fine, sir. How are you?
Doing good. It is fun to have you on the show, given
Thank
as you
you.
are my best friend and have been my best friend among a wonderful group of people in the since I was at least 3 years old.
At the
Uh,
very
so
least.
that's I know you very well. uh, So it feels a little silly to have this interview, but also I think it would be a good chance to, it is just another conversation for us, but it's a good chance to share a bit of what you've researched and discovered and applied over time and have an excuse to talk about that.
I think so.
So who are you, sir?
Who am I? Well, what an interesting question. There's a lot of dimensions to that question, but I could give a little bit of a background and see where it takes us. So, well, as you mentioned, my name is Santiago Racca. Most people call me Santi. I'm Paraguayan. I'm 31 years old. I would say my LinkedIn titles are AI engineer and founder. I'm working at startup, starting another one, and I'm a managing partner at a software agency company in Paraguay. I am now based off out of Berkeley. Yeah, baby. I know that you don't like that very much because you prefer the Palo Alto scene, maybe. But it feels very good to be close and be in the Bay Area. It's right along my alley. Um, but across my life, I've actually, and one of the things that I kind of find find to be very wholesome about my life story is that I was exposed to a lot of different things, um, just from an early age, all the way down from nutrition to fitness to like martial arts to software engineering to cattle farming to all these kind of things. So it gave me like a broad perspective of life, and I wouldn't like to call myself a specialist in any one thing, but I'd like to say that I can dabble in pretty much anything. A constant theme across that about 15, maybe even 20 years now is getting heavily involved in like physical training. That was actually my first startup. It's called Morfit. Was centered towards nutrition, not so much fitness, because I couldn't find what I could actually build in a product that I couldn't pretty much just send over in a workflowy or a PDF document. But Morfit was my intent, and it still is my intent, to simplify nutrition. So one of the underlying themes that are around all my projects is that I like to apply the Pareto law to a lot of things, making sure people understand that 20% of the inputs you put into a system are actually 80% of the outputs. And I found that to be the case in a lot of things, especially nutrition. It gets really complicated. I think from a market perspective, it gets very complicated. People trying to sell you stuff, people trying to make it seem like this is the magic bullet and that kind of stuff. And when I got into the actual science behind it, I found that there are a few factors that actually matter the most and will give you like 80% of the results, and that people should focus around that. The issue I think in nutrition lies in, well, how do you apply those factors? How do you actually make it so that it's easy to use or easy to like follow through in a plan? And my startup was, how do we actually do that and through technology?
And I saw these two threads converge. I saw you sort of develop this outsized understanding of the entirety of the nutritional cycle and
Mhm.
metabolism, while also developing sort of computer science skills and within that and like exploring that route, the whole like entrepreneurship side of things too, with all the ups and downs and everything. But there seems to be like a central axis of self improvement and of being able to synthesize the things that you know and direct them to the most impactful thing. Like just like applying the Pareto principle, but on a meta level, right?
Mhm.
And like one of the things that that you've this is impact that you've already had in people's lives is that the pursuits that you explored there, the methodology, the way of communicating around nutrition. I mean, with my life, it has changed the way I look, the way I feel, the way I sort of like engage in the world, thanks to those like second order effects. But it in retrospect, it did require this sort of reprogramming of what I thought nutrition was and what I thought health is and how I thought effort should be directed, and sort of like taking into account these forces that you mentioned, things like marketing and what they're trying to sell you, and the food industry and the incentives of the food industry, and the things that go from how the stuff works in my microbiome to
Mhm.
to the things that I actually end up deciding to eat, right? And so, why don't we start with the picture of health that you promote? Not as in like not the process, but the picture. What does health look like to you?
Oh, it's a very good question. It's actually the question that I used to start off my design thinking process interviews, my customer discovery interviews, was that exact same question. Was I want to get an idea of what people thought health was. So to me, health is synonymous to balance and flexibility. Both those words mean health to me, and that's those are kind of abstract concepts that you could go down the line and find like different use cases, but they all always boil down to me. So you actually taught me this when we were in eighth grade. That you said that there's that people think that there's good and bad, and they're opposing forces, but it's actually bad, bad, and good in the middle. That's something you did in eighth grade, and it really marked my life way before I got into nutrition. But it holds very true. So when I say that health is about balance, is and there's a good phrase that I always use: the dosage makes the poison. The dosage makes the poison, and you find this on a very like day to day level, but also, and we can get a little bit into this when you read studies. So let me just give you an example here, really quick. There's always this quote about aspartame that, oh, if you take aspartame, it's gonna give you cancer. It's always this quote, right? And it's like because there's this one study that they gave aspartame to rats, and the rats developed like so much a percentage more of an increase in risk of cancer and whatever. But then when you actually look at what how much aspartame they gave to the rats, right? It was the equivalent of drinking 120 liters of Diet Coke per day. Now, I don't know anybody that's actually drinking 120 liters of Diet Coke per day, right? So, what I want to say with that is if you drink a can of Diet Coke a day, you're probably going to be fine. And this applies in health across the line. So, and in both ways, both the healthy foods and what is considered unhealthy foods, according to certain criteria. So, if you eat one pizza a week, it's probably not going to kill you. If you eat pizza every single day, that's probably going to be harmful to your health. The same way, if you eat one chicken breast, it's not going to make you healthy. Now, if you include it periodically in your diet in a very controlled way, that's going to make you healthy, right? That's going to bring the benefits of what a chicken breast or the protein or the micronutrients that's involved with that could actually bring. And that applies to every single aspect of health. So if you overexert yourself in the gym, you're going to suffer the consequences. If you have a consistent routine, you're going to do fine. If you go super crazy with your diet and you say, I'm going to restrict all foods, then you're going to have problems. And ironically, people think that restricting your diet is a very healthy way to go about losing weight. And we know that not to be the case. Food variety in a diet is one of the best things you can have because it allows you to consume different nutrients that are coming in from different sources that you're not going to be able to find in just one source of food. And that's actually why when we had the agriculture revolution happen and we switched from a hunter-gatherer society that would hunt berries or hunt deer or hunt different kind of like animals, we switched to like kind of like a grain-based diet. We started to get really sick as a society because suddenly we stopped consuming a variety of foods and we saw that happening. So again, these are just examples of you want to have a balanced diet. And that's only on like a physical level that I'm speaking, but there's also the psychological level. There's been plenty of evidence, plenty of studies showing that the more you restrict a person, the more likely they are to rebound and binge eat afterwards in terms of nutrition. And this has been proven. There's actually one study that I found to be hilarious, which is they put one group of people on a flexible diet and one group of people on a very restrictive diet. And they went through like a 12-week program. And at the end of the 12 weeks, they put them into a room that was full with like pastries, like donuts and like other kind of fast
Hmm.
foods. And the flexible diet group had been consuming that across their program. So it was kind of like, okay, I'll have some, and some might have a little bit more, a little bit less. But the restrictive diet group, they say it was just like a stampede, man. They just came in and they destroyed that table. There was nothing to it, and I don't think you even have to look that far ahead or like look for edge cases to find that. I'm pretty sure that you have people in your life that you've known that to happen, that they went through like a very restricted period of eating and then went back to like binge eating, and everybody probably has a case like that. And it's the same thing with exercise. It's the same thing with like mental well-being, and so I think balance is such a key part there. And it's pretty much the dosage makes a poison. Just don't overexert. And we can get also into like the process a little bit later because what Morfit was trying to do, or what I'm trying to do with my startup is, well, how do you actually know when you're balanced? That's the actual key question. How do you know that this balance is correct for you? And the second part of that, so there's balance and there's flexibility. Flexibility means the ability, for me at least, the ability to be able to decide by yourself when to have one thing over one versus the other, to not
Hmm.
have a rigid set of rules, because rigid
So
sets of rules.
agency.
Yeah. What?
So agency.
So agency, exactly. Because and this applies a little bit more towards nutrition than fitness, I would say. But think about it like this: about 50, let's say 50 years ago, but we could go back. Food availability and food variety was pretty limited, right? So you pretty much had the grocery store down the corner, and they had this and this and that, and that's what you could choose. There was no Uber Eats, there was no DoorDash, right? You couldn't go out to eat so many restaurants. Probably had like four restaurants down the street, and that's about it. So what you could eat was very limited. But nowadays, you have so much food, so many options, so easily available, and we're not used to that. Our brains are not developed to take in the availability of food to such an extent yet, right? You have to think that our brains are still kind of thinking we're in the caves, and we got to have to go out and hunt, or have to go out and gather. So suddenly you're faced with like a huge amount of foods. You have to be able to have a flexibility in the sense of being able to choose by yourself what and when to consume what foods. And if you're not able to do that and you want to follow a rigid set of rules, what's going to happen is I'm going to tell you, okay, you can pretty much do this, and that. And then, so let's say you have like 10 rules you have to follow, but you then suddenly rule number 11 has to be implemented. Oh, because you know what happened? They brought in cheesecakes to the office. Oh man, and what
Mm.
do I do now? Or oh damn, my wife wants to have some ice cream. Okay, what do I do there? So like a lot of these things, if you start to analyze your day, they come up so naturally. Food is too available, it's too predominant in our day-to-days now. So, for example, just today, I wasn't able to have breakfast. So my wife pretty much was like, "Hey, I'm going to order some breakfast burritos. Do you want some?" And that was just spur of the moment thing. If you're not able to handle those spur of the moment things, you're going to have issues. So, following a very rigid versus flexible style of eating is just going to cause troubles down the line. You're not going to be able to really handle yourself. So, health to me is both those words combined: balance and flexibility, I would say.
No, that's a phenomenal answer. And I think it's a tough one to get to because most people, first of all, most people aren't, and not through any fault of their own. This is what happened to me too. Is like we don't have the tools to reflect about the accounting that needs to be balanced, right? Like we're not thinking. We think in very like instantaneous thoughts of like this immediate decision, good or bad, but we don't think about the aggregate of like good or bad over time. Um, but it's even crazier when you think about that the good or bad is localized to the context, right? So if I haven't eaten anything all day, if I'm starving, any calorie is good, right?
Very
Um,
well said.
so there's something really interesting there is that we don't have, and we're already approaching the subject from a preconditioned relationship with food that is usually very consumerist. It's usually very decadent. It's usually very um, well, it's not just food. I should say it's a lifestyle that sort of is like the modern way of living that is like very accessible food, very sedentary day to day, right? And so, and you mix those and options that serve as an escape valve, things like Netflix and things of the sort that let you sort of like, okay, I'm imbalanced and I get a feeling that emulates the well-being feeling of actually being imbalanced with sort of mindless entertainment. And I don't mean to dismiss entertainment, but like
Yeah.
if it's filling that role, then there's probably something else that's missing, right? Um, so why don't we start? And so what I guess what I meant to say by that is that if you're starving, any calories are good. Is that a healthy option versus an unhealthy option is relative to where you're at in your nutritional budget, all right, or your metabolic state. And somebody who needs to eat 12,000 calories a day is in a very different situation about how they think about eating a whole pizza versus somebody who eats 1,000 calories a day, right? So why don't we talk about the once you have a sense of balance, in the sense that you're sort of, you know, when you get that subjective feeling of you're doing it right or not, of thinking about health in the metabolic sense, in like, okay, the dynamics of the problem, why people get stuck in bad loops, and how to get into good loops.
All right. Yeah. And that was actually a very that's a very interesting thought. That's a very mature thought that you had right there. And one that I find very not so frequently in the general public. And we could talk about the metabolic ones because that is actually something super important and probably the most important thing that we have to talk about if we have to talk about nutrition. But just sort of a quick kind of like touch on that point you mentioned. For me, there is no good and bad food. There is no such thing as a good food or a bad food. There that the concept is flawed because it's exactly as you said. It's good or bad in relation to what. So if you, for example, can consume 2,500 calories a day and you hit your protein, fiber, micronutrient goals, and you have space for one ice cream, and that ice cream actually makes you stick to your diet better. So long term, you have better adherence and you're able to go through it. The ice cream is actually good. So that's a good food. In the same sense, if you had already consumed 2,500 calories, but suddenly you were like, oh, let me get some granola in because that has fiber, that granola is probably bad for you. You're going to gain weight and you're going to like suffer the consequences of that. So you always have to think, and this goes both for the day to day as well as when you're reading studies or when you're hearing news about certain foods, you always have to think about in the context of what. Nobody consumes a certain food in isolation. That does not happen. So you have to look at the whole diet. And you have to understand within this whole diet what is going on, and then we can talk about it. And one of the fastest ways that I dismantle um, theories in nutrition is if they present me a study like, oh, somebody ate carnivore, the other person ate vegan, and this happened. It's like, were calories equated? Was protein equated? Was fiber equated? If those three things were equated, then we're getting into somewhere. We're thinking about some things that are interesting or not. But most often than not, this is not the case. So you have so many keto studies, for example, showing that it's superior to fat loss. But what they do not consider is calories being the same. And when they are the same, there's still a slight difference. But then when you factor in the protein, there's absolutely zero difference in terms of fat loss. So it's these things that you have to think about. It's like, what is the impact of keto diet in the macros perspective of a diet, right? So I just want to like touch on, double down on that because I think that if somebody were to understand that, they really get a lot of psychological stress removed from their diet or from their diet and from themselves, right? In the terms that I can enjoy a pizza and it's fine, and that's okay, and you should feel okay doing that. You just have to understand that the balance thing again plays into a role, and if you consider the whole diet, and as long as you're in balance within the whole diet, that's the game. But the metabolic thing, if we're going to the metabolic adaptations, it's kind of what was the last straw slash I want to build a business around it was because I started reading about the metabolic adaptations that come from dieting, right? And I'm gonna just come in right off the bat with a phrase that astonished me when I heard it was certain studies that found that the amount of times you diet in your life are directly proportional to the amount of fat you gain in your life. So just think about that.
What?
Yes, think about that for a second. The
So the
more
number of times I say I'm going on a diet, the more fat I will get. Wow.
I remember the day I remember the day I saw that and I was like, wait a minute. But isn't the entire industry, the whole of the professional industry, getting you on diets? So this would be the equivalent of going back to the lobotomies in a sense, right? The medical practitioners. What is going on? Why would that be the case? Well, the case happens like this. So people think that metabolism is quite complicated to understand, and I wouldn't even claim that I'm an expert in metabolism because I would have to have at least 3 PhDs under my belt to understand it fully. But one way to think about metabolism is energy expenditure. So think about your metabolism being the amount of energy you expend during a day. That can be broken down into four components, which are basal metabolic rate, exercise activity thermogenesis, so EAT they call it, NEAT, which is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and then the last component, the smallest one, is the thermic effect of food, right? So it's four components. And there
Maybe
used to be
worth breaking them down. Maybe
Oh yeah.
let's break them down a little bit so that like just so that people so that we remember what the four are and like what
Awesome.
the
So basal metabolic rate is, again, I'm trying to simplify this, is the amount of energy your body expends if you were to stand, just laying down in your bed for 24 hours, and the energy that is expended by just keeping you alive is your basal metabolic rate, right? I don't remember the exact percentages right now, but it must be like 40 to 60. And then please, nobody quote me on this, but we can look it up. That's why we have Google right now, right?
Mhm.
Um, and then, so that's one. That's the big chunk of your energy expenditure is that one. Then exercise activity thermogenesis is the amount of calories you burn by exercising. And this is where it gets a little bit confusing with the other one, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So exercise activity thermogenesis is by doing vigorous, moderate to vigorous exercise. So you're going to the gym, you're playing a sport, you're going running, or any of that kind of activity is considered exercise activity thermogenesis because it's kind of like moderate to vigorous. Um, Now, non-exercise activity thermogenesis (NEAT) is the amount of calories you burn by everyday activities. So, for example, I am going up the stairs, or I'm carrying my grocery bags, I'm walking down to the to class or something like that. All those like little activities that sum up. And there's a little interesting caveat there that I'm going to talk about in a second. But that will be the third component. The fourth component, the thermic effect of food, is basically that your body has to spend calories in order to extract calories from food. So food is
Mm.
pretty much made out of three macronutrients. You got carbohydrates, you got protein, you got fat, you got alcohol technically, but it's not considered like a nutritional macronutrient. So to get calories out of the three macronutrients, you have to expend calories as well. So how much the percentage expenditure for each macronutrient is considered its thermic effect, and it's why you always have to equate protein in a diet because protein has the highest thermic effect of food. It's got 15% as opposed to 0 to 4%, which is fats and carbohydrates. So if you have two diets which have the same calories but one has more protein, that diet is spending more energy because of the thermic effect of food. Again, why it's so important to consider that. That's why you have to equate for calorie for protein as well with calories.
Oh, I see. So
You,
so wait, I didn't know. I don't think I knew this. So protein is harder for your body to repurpose. So
So harder, I wouldn't. I don't know. Harder is the word because it's a different metabolic process, but more energy.
more expensive.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly like that. So
I
again,
see.
that's why you have to be able to equate protein within an isocaloric diet study. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to get a fair reading, right?
And it's a difference of it's a factor of three difference. So it's
Yeah,
very distortive of the effect. Yeah.
very very distorted. Exactly like that. And there's also other factors like protein fills you up more and muscle building effects and such, right? Um,
Yeah, those it's like the factory for stuff in the body, right? Like
yeah,
uh
yeah, yeah. So those are the four components, right? Now we have four components, and that's your metabolism. The caveat that I want to talk about neat is, but this is kind of getting a little bit into the weeds, but I just find it so interesting. Neat actually accounts for more energy expenditure than exercise. It varies so widely between people, and I believe it's actually one of the most, if not the most important factor in determining if you're going to have a population that's slightly more obese or like tends toward obesity or towards not. In other words, sedentarism is the real killer. Not going to the gym, not doing exercise. That has benefits on its own. Obviously, like muscle building has benefits, cardiovascular exercise has benefits, the whole thing. But moving more seems to be a much more effective strategy than let's get people into gyms, right? And we can see this in populations. We can see in populations, like for example, Asian populations that are much more frequent into walking, into sitting down, into squatting positions or standing desks versus a sitting on a chair. You could see the effect on those populations. They are drastically less overweight than when you have people like an American or a Western society, which tends to favor sedentarism much more. We sleep, we get in a car, we go to the office, we sit in a chair for 8 hours a day. We come home, we sit on a couch, we eat dinner sitting down. You don't really move, so your need is pretty much negligible at that point. And then occasionally you go to the gym, right, to do some exercise. But exercise activity thermogenesis is not that big of a component when you consider the whole of metabolism. So you're not burning as many calories as you would think you're burning. So it's a pretty bad strategy for weight loss as a whole if you're considering how the percentage burning versus the whole thing, right? That makes a little bit of sense, or did I?
No, it makes so much sense, but I feel like there's like a bunch of truth bombs in there, right? Like so, like the common wisdom around how what you should do if you want to get healthier. You think I go on a diet and I start exercising,
Exactly.
and they're both misguided, right? They're both incorrect in the sense that like that is not the picture of health, and that like things like eating food can burn calories, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then also that there's a difference between uh, calorically restricted diet and okay and metabolic conditioning of saying okay, I'm not going to go into a state of deficit, which we shouldn't talk which we haven't talked about, but we should get into
Yeah.
then that
Yeah.
and then yeah, how about we do that and then we go to metabolic conditioning.
Yeah. Sounds like a plan. Sounds like a plan. Because I was kind of getting it's a very smart idea to talk about those four components because what happens now, your body is probably the best survival machine that we found in the universe up until this point. We are amazingly at adapting to different types of environment, but also different types of diets. We are so good at just switching from one type of diet to another and being able to adapt, even if there's like a transition period where it feels weird. It's actually why we can go from carbohydrate filled diet to a keto diet to a carnivore diet. We can do all those things and we don't have any problems. You would do that to other animals and they'll pretty much go crazy, right? um, or die, versus we can pretty much do that. It's actually a very good survival skill. But what we want to talk about when we talk about metabolism and dieting is your body likes to stay in a state of homeostasis, so maintenance, right? A balanced state. And that varies from person to person. There's obviously a genetic component to it, which is basically how many calories you burn to maintain your weight. So, like a calorie balance, like energy balance.
Mm.
Now, basic thermodynamics 101, energy isn't created or destroyed, it's transferred. So, your body, if you eat more calories than you burn, you're going to gain weight. If you eat less calories than you burn, you're going to lose weight. It's pretty much it, right? There's no other way around it. So, this is also kind of a truth bomb. No matter what diet you hear people talking about, at the end of the day, it has to boil down to calories in versus calorie out. There's just no way that we can get away from that, right? If you eat less calories than you burn, you will lose weight, and the other way around. And any single diet, so you could look like paleo, it just means you're eating less calories. Fasting, it means you're eating less calories because you have a restricted time window. Keto, you're taking out all carbohydrates, you're eating less calories. It all comes down to that, right? But there's other things to consider. But I just want to make the point that it's very important to understand that energy balance is the basis of all weight fluctuations or weight deltas that you could have in body composition. But what? Let's like picture an example like this. Your body has a maintenance calorie where it's normally where you sit at right now. So let's assume that's 2,000 calories per day. Standard issue. So you eat 2,000 calories and you burn 2,000 calories. You're at maintenance. Your body pretty much stays the same, slight variations between because of water or whatever, but it pretty much stays the same. Now, what were to happen if you went on a diet and you ate 1,500 calories? So 500 calorie deficit per day, which translates to 3,500 calories per week, which is that's the equivalent to 1 pound of fat. So you would lose around 1 pound of fat per week, right? Um, so your body will start to lose weight. Now think about it like this: what if you keep losing weight every week? What's going to happen eventually? You're going to lose all your fat, and then your body's eventually going
Mm.
to build, like it's going to take away the muscle. And when it doesn't have that, what is going to happen if you perpetually lose weight? You're always consuming less energy than your body needs, but you're going to die, right? This is gonna. There's no other outcome. If you keep losing weight forever, you
Mm.
just. But that doesn't happen, does it? Of course it doesn't, because your body is extremely smart and understanding what goes in and what goes out, and it will adapt its metabolism and metabolic adjustment so that it will start to actually move its maintenance to the new calories you're feeding it. Eventually, your new maintenance is going to be 1,500 calories. Now, some might think that, okay, well, if you're losing mass, then the new maintenance calorie is just because the mass reduction actually accounts for the lower basal metabolic rate. So it's just because you have lower body weight. That's why you just adjust. But actually, what they found is your body's metabolism adjusts at least 15 to 30% more than just accounting for mass reduction. So you're actually, your metabolism is burning way lower calories, less calories than just thinking about losing mass. Did I lose you, or is that too complicated?
No, no,
Or
no, 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 no. I got you. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so what does that mean? It means your body is very smart at surviving and it's feeling the deficit, and it's actually just pushing your metabolism down to make sure that you survive. And this is the reason why when you go on a diet, you'll lose weight like crazy at first, but it'll stagnate. It'll start stagnating, and eventually
Mm,
you won't lose any weight. So your new maintenance calorie is now
mm,
1,500 calories. And there's two things that are very important here. The first is the magnitude of the deficit you create dictates the magnitude of the metabolic response your body does. So, in other words, the harder you
mm,
go, the harder your body's going to respond, which is why crash dieting is so dangerous because your body will just
mm,
react like, "Well, this is actually crazy. I can't do this." It's kind of also the equivalent of if you have a business and money's coming in and out, and then suddenly you start cutting it, like you have a huge expenditure, and it's like, oh my God, I need to cut costs, need to cut costs, need to cut costs. So it's a very natural thing to do. So that's why you have to always think about deficits, which are not bad by itself. It's just important to understand these mechanisms. You do not want to create large deficits off the bat. You want to create just the amount to try to mitigate these responses. But the second thing, and this is where the real problem is, once you're at 1,500 calories, let's say, your new maintenance, normally you're pretty fed up with that diet because you've been hungry, you don't want to eat so
mm,
restrictive again, you're just not happy. So what happens in 90% of the cases is that you start eating like normal again. You go back to how you
mm,
were eating before. And most of the time, actually, because you've been restricting yourself so much, you go and eat a little bit more because you lost the weight. You can enjoy a little bit now,
mm,
or go on a vacation or whatever. But your metabolism hasn't had time to adjust back up. It takes a time as well.
mm,
So you rebound all that weight. And this is the reason why 60% of people that lose weight gain it all back in 1 year. And by the end of 3 years, it's 95%. And two-thirds of that actually end up gaining more weight than when they originally started. Going back to the phrase I was mentioning at the start of this,
mm,
and it's just because of this mechanism. It's because you are
mm,
crash dieting, your metabolism is going down, and then you're getting fed up with the diet, so you go back up, but your metabolism takes time to adjust. But the rate at which you eat and enjoy yourself far out surpasses the rate at which your metabolism goes back to adjusting. So you regain
mm,
the weight. But once you regain all the weight, you're like, oh my God, well, I gained all this weight again. So let me go back to crash dieting. But then you go
mm,
back, have to go harder. And then eventually, as age hits and your metabolism might not be able to adjust as well, and other factors or anything could actually happen there in terms of life. Eventually, if you keep going through those cycles, you end up just with a very, very low metabolism rate and excess weight. And that's why I believe that we do not actually have a problem losing weight in the world today. We don't have a losing weight problem. We have a problem keeping the weight off. That is a real problem. Anybody can lose weight.
mm,
Everybody loses weight. We just can't find a way to keep that weight off. That's the true challenge
mm,
here. That's why we have an obesity epidemic. Not because we can't lose weight, but we can't because we can't keep it off.
mhm. And there's so then that's another truth bomb that is like, okay, so let's reject the idea that exercise is going to save me. Let's reject the idea that diet is going to save me. And like, so I'll have a very generic diet. And as long as I'm cutting my calories, like as long as I am below my baseline, I'm going to lose weight, right? And now you're saying this doesn't work, right? It sets you up for failure. So what's the other half of the coin? What is the promised land then? Where do we go? We're out of options. What do you mean? Like thermodynamically, the one thing I'm supposed to do, I can't do.
That's true. That's true. And there is another half of the coin. And an important thing to mention here is that obviously, if you want to lose weight, you're going to have to go in a deficit. And that's the way it's going to be. But you have to do it understanding these mechanisms and working with your body. So the promised land kind of looks like this. First of all, we have to understand where you are metabolically speaking. If you have traditionally ate very well throughout your life and you've exercised and you keep a relatively healthy diet, it probably means that your metabolism is very healthy, you're able to consume a good amount of calories per day. You're not eating very little. You're just a generally healthy person. And if you're in that position and you want to lose a little bit of weight or this or that, you can do a slight calorie deficit. So what you want to aim for is 0.5 to 1% of body fat per week. That's kind of where you want to be. That's the sweet spot. The more overweight you are, the more pounds you have to lose, let's say, the higher you can go in that spectrum. The leaner you are, the lower you want to be in that spectrum, right? So you create this diet, and what you want to do is you want to monitor how much I'm losing per week. And eventually that's going to stagnate, obviously. And once you stagnate, you want to see, well, how low are my calories? Am I really hungry? Am I having a very bad time? Am I just like not feeling well? Or am I able to maybe cut a little bit more? If you're able to cut a little bit more, especially if you have a traditionally higher metabolism, you might cut a little bit more and you go back into that cycle and you start again, start again. But eventually it's going to stagnate. At that point, what you should do is stop there, right, with your new weight. Do not go back to crash dieting. Do not binge eat again, which again is why flexibility is so important. What you want to do is slowly, first maybe go up a little bit closer to your maintenance. You want to figure out your new maintenance, right? That's not a deficit. And then slowly start adding calories back into your diet. Not as like going back to how you were eating before right off the bat, but just in a very controlled and slow process, because then you can work with your metabolism. As it adjusts back up, you are starting to add more calories and you're able to reach your new maintenance or a higher maintenance and slowly increase your metabolic rate through a process that's called reverse dieting. So the process of reverse dieting basically means that you're adding calories back to your diet in a very controlled fashion, such that you allow your metabolism time to adjust back up, because it adjusts back up just as it adjusts back down or adjust down. And that also varies a lot. And what's interesting here is we do not know the upper limit of that metabolic adaptation towards the higher end. And what we actually found is that meat accounts for a huge percentage of that increase. So in a way,
Hmm.
it's the more you are teaching your body to eat, the more you move, which makes perfect sense.
Hmm.
Also, in a way, that you're feeding, you're getting more energy, you're able to move more, you're able to be more active. But it's interesting that the more you're able to feed a person, the more they actually try to move and spend that. And you have to do it in a controlled manner. And there are people. There's obviously a genetic factor. There are people that can eat 10,000 calories a day. There are people that can only eat 2,500, and there's a whole thing. But as long as you're keeping it in a very balanced and controlled way of feeding yourself back up, you can get back to the point where you were without having that weight regain. So you keep the weight you lost. And then you can go back and say, do I want to lose a little bit more? Do I want to start another deficit cycle? Well, you go back and you deficit again. And then you increase, then you start losing more weight, more weight, more weight, more weight. And you do the same process again. And this process, like in all fairness, is a slow process, but it's an assured process. And it's another big mistake or another virtue that is lacking in terms of health. It's patience. So people want to have
Hmm.
it by the summer. You want to lose weight, you want to look good for the summer. That's all I care about. But let me go back to my old ways during the year. But if you're able to have patience, you can achieve a level of body composition that is extremely, I could say, attractive to yourself or to whatever your goals are,
Desirable. Yeah.
desirable, let's say, and whatever that means to anybody, that can vary from person to person. Some people want to be extremely shredded, other people want to be a little bit bigger. It varies, but whatever is desirable. But you can keep that body composition, and then you can eventually keep the body composition and go back to eating how you normally eat. So then you have the promised land. That's the promised land right there. You eat how you want to eat. Food doesn't become an issue. You're not dieting. You look how you want to look, and you can keep that look for the rest of your life. And as long as you have this kind of like general sense of how much you're eating and making sure it's all like, and we haven't talked about like macronutrient compositions in a diet. We focus more on energy, but assuming it's just energy, you can pretty much just enjoy food and look how you want, which is the promised land.
Yeah. That is so then, but that's the picture of health that you get after this entire conversation, right? Like
Exactly.
it's the a state of it is the promised land. It's like, land of milk and honey, and you are unconcerned about the budget on one side. If anything, you are concerned about the budget on the other side. um, and you sort of reestablish your relationship with health, and now it's a state of being, right? It's a state of being where there's like this concern that is no longer a concern. You get to enjoy the amazing things the world affords for you, and you get to look the way you want and feel the way you want, and put your body to use in all the way you want. And there's the corollaries of, as you're moving more, your body adjusts to the movement, and like you learn to, like all that good stuff too. So it's very counterintuitive, but the whole project of nutrition really is not unlike financial habits or anything. Is like you want to increase your metabolism, and you could do this even before you cut. Like, okay, you want to be fit for the rest of your life, all right, we're going to start increasing your metabolic rate.
Exactly.
Just start with reverse dieting, and then by the time you're pushing it and you're uncomfortable with the amount of food you're eating, then you then you cut. And so all of a sudden you are in a sort of in a thermodynamic deficit, but your comfort level is high because now you're not pushing. Now you're not like, oh, thank God, I don't have to eat it, chicken every 5 seconds.
That's exactly it.
Um,
That's exactly that's actually how that's what I did. I was When I started this, I was probably eating 2,400 calories, and I was able to go up all the way up to 3,000. And there's a lot we can talk about that too, because sadly we don't have enough studies to show um, like these long term effects. It's very hard to measure how much you can actually reverse diet and how much weight you can keep off and on and all that stuff. But let's say, and so I want to just make the note here. This is a lot of anecdotal evidence versus like hardcore evidence or like empirical evidence. But anecdotally, I was able to go from 2,400 to 3,000 calories, and suddenly my deficits were 2,500 calories. I was enjoying peanut butter, enjoying sandwiches every day, but I was losing fat at the same time, and that
mhm.
just felt amazing. So you're enjoying the process, and I think that's a key part of being able to have a sustainable and sustainable body composition change is if you're able to enjoy the process of doing it. If you're not able to enjoy the process, the likelihood of success it goes extremely down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's stuff there that is, um, well, I keep thinking about the accounting metaphor, where it's sort of like the basal metabolic rate is sort of like your fixed costs, and then you have the thermodynamic or the thermic effect of food is cost of goods sold,
Yeah,
basically.
I like
Uh, and then you have the variable costs, and some of them are sort of like exercise. Let's call it's like in I'm not sure where exercise falls, but like they're both variable costs, right? And
both
so you
very
have your yeah, but say like if the yeah, one of them it feels like a little bit of overhead, right? Like one of them is more targeted and the other one's more overhead.
Mhm.
um and neat being overhead is like if your overheads are high, it's almost like this liability, right? And so your body, when faced with a a cut in revenue, has to adjust the budgets for the baseline, the all these components, right? And the dream one, the one that you really want to go up, is the basal one, because you want that one to uncorrelated with any of your other activities, you want that one to be the most high because that gives you the most budget to then allocate to other things, right?
Yeah,
um,
yeah, and so we do see that there's increases. So first of all, we see a decrease in basal metabolic rate, and then we see the reversal of that process when you go reverse dieting. So you go back up to where, and we do see that there's increases in basal metabolic rate. But what we haven't been able to prove or at least understand fully yet is the extent at the upper limit of what that could actually look like. We
mhm.
haven't been able to do, but I think it's not because it's not happening, but it's because it's extremely hard to measure that in a very very
Mhm.
sophisticated way. Because the only way you would truly be able to measure that is if you have people a year,
Lie
2 years,
down.
3 years in a lab. where we're able to control every single variable and we're able to understand exactly how the basal metabolic rate change, which is an extremely expensive study, and you would have to have a decent population size. So it's a point where I'm always like very adamant about saying that we do not have the evidence to see how much we can actually increase the basal metabolic rate
Mm.
yet. But anecdotally speaking, and hundreds of thousands of cases, we know it's happening. We know that there's a, we know that it does increase. We just don't know how much of that is actual basal metabolic rate versus need or any other factor, right? Um, so we're kind of on the fence there. Interestingly enough, I always thought that if I managed to get about a quarter of the population to use Morfit, I was able to then extrapolate that data and see and actually get some
Mm.
insight.
Mhm.
But short of that happening, we're gonna have to see other ways to do it. Um,
Mhm.
but but I think that honestly, having gone through it myself and having gone through it with thousands of clients, we understand that both are increasing, and what we end up happening, or we end up having, is a person kind of in their, like, they went back to their teenage years when you're able to eat just pretty much
Mhm.
what you want, and your metabolism is just burning all that up. And we can replicate that. We've done it hundreds, thousands of times, just ourselves, and it's been done with other coaches and with other kind of apps hundreds of thousands of times. And that's the path I believe everybody should start taking, and we should actually start taking this from a very young age, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily like infants, children, but teenage years is when you start to see the effects of dieting gone wrong, especially in young women,
Mm.
young ladies.
Mm.
The pressure of like looking good and all that kind
Mm.
of societal weird pressure that happens is when young ladies start to diet, and those are the moments where you want to keep them away from that, and you just want to make
Mhm.
sure they're always eating healthy, that they're always eating the right amount of food, and that they're always
Mm.
exercising correctly, so that the point where they might want to look a certain way, it becomes extremely easy to lose that weight. Or if you actually have them in a very good body composition, you try to increase the calories they eat, so they're always eating to the upper limit of their comfort, right? And it becomes practically impossible to lose weight. So I actually had a friend who did this so hardcore that he was eating 3,700 calories per day, and he was extremely skinny, and and then he couldn't hold it anymore. So he was like kind of, he was skinny, normal skinny, but like a pretty ripped guy. But then we went back to 3,200 because he couldn't keep 3,700 a day, and he lost a lot of weight. He became really skinny. So that was actually a situation that we said we also want to avoid that. We
Mm.
don't want to get a person to eat so much that then it becomes kind of harmful if they have to reduce calories. But
Mm.
actually, we concluded based on that observation that naturally that won't happen. Naturally that won't happen. A
Mhm.
person would naturally fit a comfort level there and be happy to stay there. But it just again goes to show you that regardless of not having the empirical evidence to show it, we do have cases where we've been able to
Mm.
replicate getting your basal metabolic rate all the way up to a very high
Mm.
number, and then having the cause of cutting calories actually lose weight still, right?
Mhm. No, it's so interesting, and then I find it interesting that the idea of the basal metabolic rate, if your goal is to increase the energy uh, expenditure of your body, then it's sort of like it dovetails nicely with the idea of a higher energy state that you
Exactly.
hear from everybody from Tony Robbins to the Hindu traditions or like the latest consciousness research is you want to be in a high energy state, and this is just literally going ahead and doing it, right? Like your body's going to be burning more. Uh, or you could even start wording it right. You could even say irradiating more energy, burning more energy, right? And that energy, not only does it come coupled with this sense of like the very real psychological trap of when you're in a difficult relationship with food, of saying, "Oh, I really shouldn't be eating this." But my window for the crime is limited, so I'm going to try and do it as much as I can.
Hmm.
Uh, and then that becomes the food habit trap thing, where it's like you binge out of a sense of guilt and like what do you call it, inadequacy, and then it sort of feeds into itself, right? But it hinges on this idea that you're only doing it because you think you shouldn't, right? But don't think about it that way. Think about it like, imagine you take that constraint away, right? And you are in same exact situation, but your metabolic rate is higher. It makes no difference. You wouldn't eat, you wouldn't binge just because you shouldn't, right? You would say like, okay, I'm full, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly that. And it even goes back to what we're talking about food variety. So the less
mm.
calories you can consume and keep your body weight, the more limited you are in options to get different nutrients from different kind of foods. The more you're able to eat, the more likely your diet is to be filled with all the right micronutrients, all the right macronutrients that you need to consume. Because
That is so interesting. So essentially, like, is like, okay, the things that we think of as healthy food, chicken breast and, salads and whatnot, those are good choices when you're limited in options because of your caloric budget.
Mhm.
But you if you increase the caloric budget, you will find the amount of protein that you need and the amount of fiber that you need, um, among basically whatever you choose to, anything that you choose will probably do the trick.
Exactly. You can even take it a step further, man, because you could think about it in a way that you will reach your protein goals almost by um, just naturally without thinking about it. Like you won't have even a say in the matter, because like it or not, the amount of calories you're consuming, it has to either have protein, carbs, or fat. Unless you're having an extremely like you only eat rice, which would be very weird to find out in the wild. Somebody that eats a lot of calories and only consumes it from one source. That'd be extremely weird to find. Like you only
I
are.
ate 12,000 calories a day, and they're all rice.
Yeah, they're all nice. I have absolutely nothing else, and nothing else pleases me. It's very, very rare to find. But naturally, so you stop worrying about, am I eating enough protein? Am I eating enough fiber? Am I getting enough vitamin C? Am I getting enough vitamin A, D, whatever? Because naturally they're gonna come. So you're even removing more stress from your thinking about food, because it's so hard not to consume the right amount of nutrients. Right? It becomes a problem. We even have people who like certain fibrous foods, like they like to eat a lot of pears, they like to eat a lot of like veggies, and we actually have to limit them, because then they would like overeat their fiber, right? They got into situations where the calories were so high they were consuming too much of their fiber, which again is also a bad thing, right? But it's just so funny that it's such a better position to be in at the end of the day, is that when you're able to get into this high energy state, as you say, because everything just follows so naturally from that. You're just able to do whatever you want, kind of, in a way, like you could
Mhm.
still do crazy things. And mind you, this is also very interesting. When we say you can eat 3,000 calories a day, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're eating 3,000 calories each day. You could have a 2,000 calorie day and then a 4,000 calorie day, and then you just average it out. We're always talking about averages in terms of calories. We're never talking about like a daily thing, because daily calorie intake, and this is where a lot of people get messed up as well, will not be able to tell you the net effect of body composition across time. You have to think at least in terms of weeks. And we like to think about in terms of week, because month becomes unmanageable to it, just in a practical way to think
Too
about it.
much, yeah.
Yeah. And daily is too short of a time span. Like there is no on off switch with fat loss. It's not like, oh, I'm losing fat. I'm in a fat loss phase. I'm in a deficit, or oh, I'm in a surplus. No, when you eat food, when you have a large meal, you're in a caloric surplus. And then as you digest the food and you use that energy, you're in a caloric deficit. And that just
Mm.
keeps happening all the time. Your metabolism does that automatically. When you talk about a caloric deficit, you're talking about the net positive or net negative um, energy balance that you have in your diet. And we usually measure that on a weekly basis, right? Um, so when we say these things like you can eat 3,000 calories a day, it kind of means that if you want to go out to a party and you want to like extra overeat, then that's fine. And then some days you're going to
Mhm.
regulate a little bit more, but it's a very natural thing. You'll never run into positions where I really need to watch what I'm putting in my mouth. And that's kind of where
Mhm.
you want to be. Just a natural flow of, because we have this food availability issue, which is not an issue, it's a blessing really, right? But
Mhm.
because we have this is the situation we're in right now. I'm just able to walk through life and normally eat, and I don't have to worry about that stuff. So the end
Mhm.
goal is to not diet in a way.
Yeah, exactly. It's the anti. It's the not knowing you know, right? It's like
Exactly.
it just yeah, it flows out of you.
Exactly.
Um, and but there's an important component that there is the even knowing that this is scientifically sound, that this is like proven, that this is true. Um, that like there's no way to we don't know how to dodge the laws of physics. So as insofar as the laws of physics are true, this is true. Um, then there's still a cognitive gap in deciding to commit to this thing, right? To commit to a project of health and to the promised land, right?
Mhm.
I think it's important to think about the promised land because that is where you're going, and like it's what got um, you don't really get going in that direction unless you imagine and you can like taste the promised land, right? Um, but it's very hard to do, especially from a cognitive conditioning perception of being just like in the loops that you're in, right? You can't break out of your own box. But there are things that can help you break out of that box, right? There are things that like start building the little grains of sand, like start getting you in that direction, and that amplify the effects of your choices over time. So this is where exercise comes back in
Yeah.
and now presented as a cognitive device. And like, okay, the calories you burn in an exercise session, that's not what you're trying to think about. Like you're trying to think about the lasting effect of the workout
Exactly.
and how structurally that changes your metabolic composition so that over time your body is set up to increase its metabolism and develop itself to its full competency. It's not a thing that you do to lose weight. It's a thing that you do to burn more energy. And I want to be careful about that, not to burn instantaneously, but to burn over time.
Indeed, indeed, and there are other aspects to that. So one of the things, and I might be misquoting this, but I used to think that building muscle. So the common like knowledge or the common like um idea that floats around is the more muscle you have, the more calories you burn. So building muscle is a great way to set yourself, and that is true. But I believe the last studies I saw was that you, for every kilo of muscle you build, kilogram of muscle, so like 2.2 pounds, you burn an extra 65 calories. So
Hmm.
that's not a lot, man. So to gain 5 kilograms of muscle, which is a lot of muscle if you're
That's a
building,
lot. Yeah.
what that comes out to about 320 extra calories, which does make a difference, but it's not like this, oh my God, I'm burning the world of a difference.
Hmm.
But there is one thing here, though I don't want to be pessimistic about that. There's two things. One, I think I'm not sure how much, but it is energy expensive to build muscle. So you
Hmm.
might
Hmm.
maybe not maintaining the muscle itself is that expensive, but to build it, you do have to act on an extra step. But specifically about building muscle is I have two individuals at 10% body fat levels, but their muscle mass is going to determine how well they look or feel at 10% body fat.
Hmm.
So you could be at 15% body fat and look completely different. Or look objectively better, I would say, than a person at 10% body fat, depending on your level of muscle. So
Hmm.
if body fat is usually there's a health component, but normally when people like think about body fat and how much the body fat they want to be, is because they're looking more towards a body composition kind of view, how well they want to look.
Hmm.
So building muscle is a great strategy to have higher levels of body fat, but still look better than lower levels of body fat. So I think when you think about exercise,
Hmm.
there's also another component, which is if your goal is body composition, having more muscle is going to dictate how well you look. And I don't want to offend anybody here because I believe that body composition is extremely subjective, and
Hmm.
something that like I also want to say that most people think that getting really jacked is very attractive, and you end up seeing that that's not really the case, right?
Hmm.
But let's say like a reasonable amount of muscle and body fat. Um, you you kind of want to build going towards more like a standard the standard view of what body composition is pleasing to Western society, at least, let's say, where we're adjusted to. um, you do want to build more muscle to have that look, right? And exercise is the way you're going to achieve that, regardless of the diet you have.
Hmm.
So you want to have a good diet, but you want to exercise. So exercise, I would say, has, from a cognitive perspective, is a way to achieve the look you want in parallel to the body fat you're losing, but achieving a better body composition. Maybe I got it
Hmm.
too uh, tangled up there. But basically, what I want to say is you should think of exercise as a way to achieving the body composition you want, not as a way to lose fat.
Hmm.
If
No,
that,
well, there's that aspect for sure, but then there's like the layers of abstraction that the brain does when you subject it to something like progressive overload. And so, not only we should talk about progressive overload and how that builds muscle, for one thing, and then but then there's also the cognitive effects of it, and like
oh,
the
okay, okay.
downstream effects of the cognitive exercise of exercise.
Okay. I see where you're going. No, of course. Well, then we're talking about a completely different thing, and there I am actually. There's another phrase I love, which is, if if we could synthesize the effects of exercise into a drug, it'll be the most abused drug in the world, and I do believe that to be true. So exercise
Hmm.
produces such a positive effect on cognitive function, on executive function, on energy levels, on mood, on mental well-being, on every aspect, that it should be fundamental to anybody actually trying to achieve a better state of being. That there's no question about it. And I actually like to talk about exercise more along these terms than body composition, because that's a real effect of it. To be able to and progressive overload is, in a way, one of those things, but it's any form of exercise that challenges you to become a better version of yourself every single day, right? I believe that the humans have a natural craving for improving, and exercise is the lowest hanging fruit you can possibly have for getting that in right off the bat and every day.
Hmm.
So normally, like, when you think, yeah.
I want to say that when I say progressive overload, I mean more like this growth mindset. The idea
Hmm.
of I am forcing myself to perform better at something than I performed last time. You
Yeah.
know, this could be a sprint, it could be a run, it could be flexibility, it could be obviously lifting. Like all those things, I think fall into the same bucket of there's a baseline I'm going up against, and I'm trying to expand the boundaries of my reach.
Indeed, and I honestly think that progressive overload is, this. Remember when I mentioned at the beginning that I never really built a product around exercise, and it was kind of because of progressive overload, because
Hmm.
that is kind of a magic bullet. That it's not a magic bullet because you have to pay with a lot of effort, but the key is literally what you just said. No matter what physical endeavor you're going, if you could measure that, and it could be anywhere, and I actually encourage people when they start, no matter their strength level. So let's take strength training as an example, right? No matter how strong they are to begin with, let's say bench press, I encourage people, just start with an empty barbell. Don't put
Hmm.
any weight on it. Just start with an empty barbell. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you can do it like so, because anybody can lift an empty barbell. But what happens is, all right, you have a measurement. That's all you need. A measurement, an initial measurement of, this
Hmm.
is, let's say, 3 sets of 10. Perfect. Initial measurement, so that you can measure again the next time and be like, let me add. And again, this is my personal recommendation: add the least amount of weight in terms of strength. This is specific to strength training. The least amount of weight that your gym allows for, or that your equipment allows for. So if that is
Hmm.
literally 2.5 pounds total, it's 2.5 pounds. That's what you want to aim for. Just the absolute lowest, because then there'll be like the barbell plus 5 pounds, or let's say 2.5 per side, 5 pounds in total. Measurement again, and you just keep increasing. You just want to get into that rhythm. That is the absolute secret. And a lot of people don't really underestimate the power of that, because they have short-term thinking in terms of what this effect does. They think, okay, but does that mean that I'm going to be doing 10 pounds? That's pretty much nothing. But what it actually means is that 6 months down the line, if you can stick to this, you'll be benching 225. And by God, your body will be so different
Hmm.
when you're benching 225. And if you apply the same logic at the end of 3 years, you're gonna be benching a lot of weight. And your body composition is gonna show that, right? Or the mindset or everything. And it's also such a great analogy to life about the
Hmm.
compound effect of just very tiny adjustments that you can't really tell when you're in the weeds of it and you're in the day to day. You only see a 2.5 increase. This is nothing. This is so insignificant, but you add that up across time and the effect is so amplified. It's so big that the results just speak for themselves. And also one thing that I love about that is the results are inevitable if you're able to
Hmm.
stick with that. And I think that's very beautiful because it kind of like also takes away a lot of the stress of, is this actually going to work out for me? Well,
Hmm.
it's a very simple answer. If you're able to bench 315 pounds, you're going to have a good tricep, you're going to have a good shoulder, you're going to have a good chest. In the same way, if you're able to run a 5 minute mile, then a 4.30, and then a 4 minute mile, you just you're gonna be faster. There's just no way around it. Like if you can do that, you're just gonna be faster. You're gonna be able to perform a better sport. If you can jump this high and then this high and then this high, you're gonna be able to dunk eventually. There's just no way around it. And it's just such a it's I believe it's a very beautiful in the simplistic way of, if I can commit to just this one pattern of progressive overload, I am going to be able to achieve all of this. And it's not because I I believe in it or I have faith in it. It's because it has to be so. There cannot be another way.
Hmm.
I just think that's good life lessons too.
No, it's I mean, but it's incredibly powerful. And one thing that I hadn't thought about, but yeah, I thought about when you were saying is like it is the same activity to go from 0 pounds to 5 pounds than it is to go from 220 pounds to 225 pounds. It's the same that you've done the same thing,
It's the same
right?
thing. There is
Like
absolutely no.
internally, it's the same thing. It might even be easier to go from 220 to 225 than to go from 0 to 5.
Probably, and it probably follows like a kind of like a weird cycle where you kind of go strong and go low. But
Actually, wait. Actually, there's a couple of thoughts here. I wanna pick your brain on. So this is echoing pretty strongly with the metabolic thing, where you're almost like progressively overloading your metabolism, right? You're giving it just a little bit more, making sure that you can do it right, not having any side effects, and then you give it a little bit more, and then you
yeah,
go to the same. And eventually, you hit plateaus that are either discomfort or other
genetic limits,
stuff,
I
right?
say.
Yeah, and then you have to adjust and you have to face the fact that you're staring at a wall. And this comes in the dieting when you're if you're in a deficit, when your metabolism catches up to you, or if you're in exercise and you've made it to 60 pounds and all of a sudden you just can't get another rep past, you
Hmm.
know plus 65, right? What's that about? What's the strategy there?
Steroids, man. No, I'm just kidding. um, so in both cases, I would say a deload. In
Okay.
in exercise, it's an actual deload, and in terms of dieting, we usually call them diet breaks or just like getting off the fat loss for a second. So it just works in reverse, right? So a deload is based. So the reason why you're not able to push past, it's probably because you are not giving your body enough time to recover, right?
Hmm.
Within normal human grounds, like once we're talking about elite level, there's there could be other components, right? And we're also excluding like technique and a lot of things that could be fixed. So assuming
Mm.
all that is constant, right? So if you're not able to progress, it's because your body's just not able to recover enough in terms of strength training or anything like that. So you deload. You give your body enough time to recover from a very very strong period of pushing itself. And once it recovers fully and you work your way back up, you're probably going to break through all PRs. And there's a lot we could talk about, but like programming in terms of like mesocycles or microcycles or different kind of like weightlifting cycles which is a little bit more my area of expertise than I would say like a running program or anything like that.
Mm.
But normally the best way to get over a plateau is to deload. I would say that's worked perfectly for me in the past, right? I would also like to say that you have to be very patient. Like, I wouldn't deload immediately after failing once because a lot of factors also play in a day to day basis. So you could be feeling, well, how was your sleep that week? How were you eating that week? Did
Mm.
you have emotional stress that week? There could be a lot of things happening. Um, so I would also like try to make sure it is actually a recovery thing and not necessarily life getting in the way kind of thing. But deloading to about 80 to 50%, depending on where you are, it's probably a good idea. And when you're talking about dieting, and once the metabolism catches up to you, what we see a lot of people do is they diet break, which is basically having about 2 weeks, 4 weeks where they go back up a little bit and then go back down to the
Mm.
fat loss phase. That usually improves adherence. That usually gives your body enough time to recover a little bit, metabolically speaking, so you're able to lose a little bit more weight. And that's been proven to be a pretty effective strategy at managing. There was even a study, but I think it's already been debunked, or not debunked, but that it's been shown to actually not be the case. Where it's called the Matador study, this was done in Australia, where they compared continuous calorie restriction versus intermittent calorie restriction,
Mm.
was weeks off, and obviously the intermittent one was a way longer diet, but I think they
Mm.
lost, I wouldn't say like half, but at least 30% more body weight if they were
Mm.
intermittent than just by doing a straight one. But there have been
Mm.
newer studies that were able to show that wasn't the case. So I think more analysis is meant to be done. I think it
Mm.
boils down to that there is a factor of getting a little of a deload in terms of dieting in, and just improving your adherence a little bit and giving your body a little bit time to calm down in terms of metabolic adjustments. That seems to be a pretty good strategy. Eventually you're gonna hit a wall, metabolically speaking, but in terms of strength training, I've never seen that wall happen, and I think that wall is very hard to measure.
Oh yeah, or I mean, yeah, I mean the examples of records are so high. You know, like you just go
Yeah,
to the gym and you can see some guy lifting something way
yeah.
heavier than. Um, okay,
I,
but now let's talk about the cognitive effects, right? Like the subjective effects about facing a plateau, or the cognitive effects of willingly taking on a challenge like this. What else does this manifest into?
specifically in terms of a plateau, you mean, or we're still,
No,
or
in general, just progressive overload, or the putting yourself through the exercise.
Mhm. So I think these things are there. I've pretty much talked a lot about a lot of analogies I've had in my life. So for example, you know how there's this common theme about like failing in like in a business process. It's not failure, but it's just a learning, and then you keep growing, and you need to look
Mm.
out for failures, and failure is actually a good thing. I've always found it quite funny that in terms of muscle building, no actual muscle failure is what's kind of what's needed to grow.
Mm.
So it's like the literal translation of kind of like the business side of it is in terms of physical, in the physical realm, it's
Mm.
the literal translation of what you want to achieve. I always found that to be quite entertaining, as a kind of like a thought experiment. But I think there's like the acute response, cognitively speaking, to exercise, which is a better feeling of well-being, right? Like
Mm.
an effective feeling like
Endorphins, yeah.
endorphins and that kind of stuff. But the chronic effect is that you are training your mind to be patient, disciplined, persistent, and I guess just not giving up. And you're training your
Mm.
mind. This is where I think it's actually very important. You're training your mind to embrace the uncomfortableness of a situation, because it definitely is not comfortable to have 315 pounds on your back and you are deep in the squat hole and you're trying to get up and and you're not getting up, and it's just a matter of, my god, I might die here, but you're willingly pushing yourself to that. And that, what I believe that's doing to your mind is saying that we have to embrace being uncomfortable. We have to embrace that the good things in life will put you in situations where you're not going to be comfortable. But that's actually okay. That's actually not even only okay. That is something to be cherished, that's something to be valued, something to be honored, because it means that you're going above and beyond yourself for something greater. You are sacrificing instant gratification for what you could become tomorrow. And I think that's just a very honorable thing, and I think that's something that I honestly think that if we had more of that in society, we will be able to solve a lot of the problems that we have today. Especially as we were talking a little bit about like Netflix and that stuff. Like, it's not that we're going out against entertainment; it's just the fact that we value instant gratification so much more than delayed gratification, right? That what's happening tomorrow, and just exercise is such a powerful way to get that, because there's no way around it. And I think Henry Rollins once said, like, it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, what you believe in, everybody's the same under the bar. And I've always loved that. And because if you have 225 on either side, it really doesn't care what you believe in or what you tweeted that day. That's 225 going straight down. And whatever you believe in, okay, we don't really care, right? And so it's like an even playing field. Like, the bar doesn't care about what you're feeling, it's just gravity doing its job. And you have to go up against that. And it's just a very we're focusing a lot on strength in this case, strength training. I think because it's what we practice more on a day-to-day basis. But it's the same thing with running, it's the same thing with yoga, with any sport. It's just a matter of, if I can push myself to be uncomfortable, if I can get up when I have to get up, if I can just keep going, I'm definitely gonna fail, I'm definitely gonna feel uncomfortable, I'm definitely gonna be in situations where I want to give up, but I still show up. I think that reprograms your brain to be able to apply that same philosophy in all aspects of your life. And it comes from the deepest and most primal sense of us humans, from the physical part, right? And having that rooted in the physical part manifests itself into the mind, and then eventually into the spirit, which I think also is why we value athletes so much as a society. Is because on a subconscious way, we just honor and value that extreme sacrifice towards achieving something, by unconsciously knowing that they're breaking all the barriers to achieve that, and we value that, and we want to honor that. And so I think that anybody that engages in that activity will be able to exceed in all areas of life, not just the physical one, right? And there's balance there too that we could talk about. Like, obviously, not maybe well, there are people who are athletes, obviously, but maybe your life is not it's not about being an athlete, but your life is going to be better because of this.
And it's one of the few things that is intransferable too, right? Like anything else you can transfer, but you can't transfer the effects of exercise. Like you can't uh, transfer um, the story that your body ends up telling because or that your mind ends up telling because you put it through this thing, right? So there's an inalienable quality to it that I think is easy to overlook too. um, and and I don't know. I think one of the things when you were saying about our respect for athletes, like we have this, um, and tying back to also what you said about instant gratification, is that we see ourselves from a distorted lens of where average is and where expected is, right? And we see like pictures of health that are augmented by digital tools or drugs of many kinds, or in studio scenarios that have been edited. So like our perception with like what we should look like is very very different, and then we look at what the average person looks like, and that's also very very different. And so I think it's like we want to feel that we're living up to our own expectations of ourselves now, and we need, so it's not, I don't think it's gratification as much as it is like I feel a state of deficit that I need an escape from. And so,
Mm,
but once you are in a position of, well, okay, you're not escaping this anymore because you are the same person doing. Um, so there's a state of discomfort with our own expectations of ourselves, and sort of like we get met with things in the world that promise us this will make you feel this balm that you need, right? And so there's this other exercise of saying, um, okay, I need to reframe my entire relationship to the entire thing, which is a
Mm,
very difficult thing to do, right? Um, but as you were saying, also, it manifests into different realms. I've seen this happen in you with how you approached learning your technical abilities as a
mhm.
software engineer. And, like I've seen you go from no formal training in it to an expert, right? Um, so why don't we talk about that for a little bit, and like the general mindset of being willing to learn what needs to be learned.
Mm, it's yeah, yeah, totally. So you remember when I was saying that it relieves a lot of stress from you when you do progressive overload. Okay, if I can keep adding 5 pounds, if I can keep adding 5 pounds, I'm not there yet. I don't see it, but I can trust that if I can lift 225 pounds, then I will look and do what I have to do in terms of my performance. Well, I've just always found it to be the case. Like that has directly translated, for example, into my technical skills. So when I was starting out, I had no idea what that other thing was, the other side, let's say, and I didn't have a clear like roadmap of this, and this, but I did know that if I showed up every single day and I did what I had to do, and I found out what I had to do because it's slightly, I guess, learning to code is slightly different than just adding like a little weight every time, right? But you can kind of figure it out as well. Like, but if I just did the next thing and I showed up and I showed up and I showed up and I never stopped, even when it got uncomfortable, even when I got plateaued, even when all these things happened, that sooner or later I was gonna be able to find myself in a position where I was like the equivalent of I can bench 225, and and so it was. And so it was. Like I didn't. It wasn't like I had a roadmap where it's like, oh, if I do this, if I learn like I don't know, if I learn like HTML, then CSS, then JavaScript, then this is and this, and eventually here, this is the exact point where I'll be a software engineer. It was much more like, okay, I need to do this, I need to do this, and need to do this, and doing the analogy again, it's kind of like you know what you want to do, where you want to go, but you have the humility, the humbleness of being able to have a focus on the now. So like, okay, this is where I want to be, but right now I'm humbled enough to focus on just this part, and then on this part, and then on this part, and then on this part. So it's kind of like you have this eye on the vision, but you spend a lot more time working on the now and moving towards that vision. And that vision happens because it has to happen. And that has happened for me in terms of learning how to code, but also like learning how to play the drums or learning how to play the guitar or any endeavor or business or learning how to do anything really. It's just a matter of I showed up, and I showed up even when I didn't want to show up. And there were plenty of times when it was uncomfortable, much more. There were more times when I was uncomfortable than I was comfortable. And I think that's a good thing because it signaled to my brain that it already understood that that means I'm growing. So because
Mm.
I had all these years of putting myself in uncomfortable situations that I knew were helping me become physically more adept at whatever I was trying to do, I knew that when I was mentally there or emotionally there or spiritually there, it also meant the same thing. So it was kind of like a teaching that if I keep myself pushing, I keep raising the bar and raising the bar and raising the bar, and just a little bit more, and it could be just so small increments that it doesn't really feel like you're doing anything. But if you just keep on doing it, eventually it's going to happen. And so it was. And I think that's a lesson that a lot of people, I mean, you could do it without exercise, I'm sure, but exercise also has all the other benefits of health that you could possibly imagine. And there's, I don't see no reason why you should be exclusive to it, or mutually exclusive to it to other areas of your life. But if you can learn that lesson about that you should be feeling uncomfortable and that you should push yourself and that you should trust the process, then what you want to be or where you want to be, it has to happen. Like there is no other way around it. um that's kind of like a life philosophy that I have, actually. No, there's no way around it. And it's also interesting why exercise is such a good analogy. It's because in other areas of life, because you're not able to say I can just put 5 pounds, it's so clear how you're able to progress. we tend to get very comfortable. And I've seen this happen to a lot of software engineers where it's like, okay, I've reached a level where I can get paid relatively well and I can do my job relatively well. I don't know if this was your case, but it's just like around my peers. I'm kind of cool, you know. Why do I need to put myself into another uncomfortable position? I'm good here. I can get paid well. I don't really need to know. But I think it's because you don't know that the 2.5 thing. It's not so clear. So you kind of don't want
Mm,
to go and find out what you want to do more. You don't want to push
mm,
yourself to that uncomfortable level. But if it's second nature to you because that's all you know is that you have to keep adding 5 pounds every time, then that won't ever happen to you. That won't ever be the case in any endeavor you do. You're just gonna naturally go out and seek other situations like growth, a growth in any area. So if growth is your de facto way, and exercise could be the catalyst to that, or anything could be the catalyst to that. But if that is your de facto way of looking at things, then I don't really believe there is anything you cannot achieve. So that's why I
mm,
think like a concept like progressive overload is so powerful or anything because it's just a simple formula, um, but it's a magic formula. It's a simple
mm.
formula, but it's magical in the sense that the effects or the results that you can get with it is just insane. It's I can't really put an upper limit to it, right?
Mhm. No, I mean it is. Um, it's really heartwarming to hear you talk about all that because I think it's very true, right? I think it's like there's a and there's a special flavor. There's a special aspect of the flavor of accomplishing this via exercise that is qualitatively different from
Mm,
doing it in other domains, right? There's a very intimate thing. It's you against you.
mhm,
Uh, and okay, but that leads me to my next thing. That is, how do you balance the life optimizer in you, the hunger for growth, with the need for deload? Like, how do you balance the intolerance and tolerance in your brain with the state that you're in versus the state that you want to be in?
mhm. Balance. It's balance at the end of the day, right? Could you believe that this actually? This is gonna be very funny and really like what the hell. But Master Roshi for Dragon Ball said it best, man. Like Goku was training so hard, and he was like, "But Master, we have to train." And he was like, "Even the greatest warriors need to rest." And another great analogy is from The Alchemist. Actually, I'm gonna give two analogies: Dragon Ball and The Alchemist, so people know what a diverse background I have in my life.
Mhm.
Uh, but there's a story in The Alchemist where somebody's looking for happiness, and they basically gave them a king, a wise king in a castle, gave them a spoonful of oil. It's like, go around the castle, don't drop a spill of oil, and then come back. And he walked around the castle and without dropping a spill of oil. And then he came back and is like, look, I didn't drop anything. See, but did you see the tapestries? Did you see the halls? Did you see all this? It's like, no. We'll go back and do it again. And then he went and saw everything and all the stuff. And he came back. He didn't have a single drop of oil in the spoon. He dropped it all. And he was like, oh, but you dropped all your oil. And what he said was the key to happiness is looking at all the wonders in life without dropping the oil in your spoon, right? And that
Mm,
story is so powerful because, and going back to what you're saying about balance, is if you only exercise for the sake of exercise, that also kind of defeats the purpose, right? If you're only growing for the sake of growing, that also defeats the purpose. The purpose is to use the growth to inspire life to be better. And
mm,
when I think about deload, or in terms of like life, is that I don't want to go to the gym just to look good or just because I want to go to the gym just because of that. I want to go to the gym because I also want to go to the beach and look good if I want to do
mm,
that. I want to go train because I want to go play a game of pickleball and be able to play well. I want to learn
mm,
how to code and grow because one day I want to be able to have a successful unicorn or exit and be able to enjoy
mm,
life. So it's understanding that the growth happens or you push yourself to grow in order to receive or experience things that without that growth you wouldn't be able to achieve. But if you don't open yourself up to receive that, then you're pretty much growing for no reason,
mm.
for nothing other than your own self interest. and that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So the way that I balance is it's that the growth I seek is to enable me to experience life at the fullest way possible. And that's the end goal. Again, we diet, we do a reverse dieting because we want to be able to go out and have a good time and be able to eat foods and enjoy it. We don't do that. We don't do all that process and patience just because I want to eat more. That doesn't make any sense. I just want to be able to go to a
Mm,
party and enjoy myself. That's the goal. Not eating more calories. It's being able to enjoy yourself. The goal isn't to go to the gym and lift 225 pounds. The goal is to feel strong so you can be strong in whatever endeavor you want to do. The goal isn't to learn how to code, it's to be able to build what you want to build so you can experience life. So, growth for the sake of growth doesn't make any sense. But growth for the sake of experiencing life to all the fullest you can because the growth enables that to happen, that's the deload, right? That's the
mm,
actual thing. So I don't know if it's like a deload thing, but it's more like I grow because I want to be able to experience more. Because we only really
mhm,
have 90, or I guess now with modern medicine, we don't know the extent of how long we'll be able to live. But even
mhm,
if we live that long, and think about it in terms of that too. If I were to live 150 years, I what it would mean if I was a growth oriented person is that I'll be able to experience more in 150 years. But if I were to live
mm,
150 years and I still have this kind of like fixed mindset, it's gonna be 150 years of the same thing that's not gonna make me
mm.
happy. It's only delaying, it's only making you unhappier for longer. It doesn't make any sense. So even extending life only makes sense if the quality of your life is also growing as you're extending it. If it's not,
Mhm.
then it doesn't make a single doesn't make
Yeah,
sense.
that's pretty
Right?
horrible.
It's pretty horrible, right? That's what I'm saying. So I guess that's how I balance it, right? I have very clear why I want to grow,
Hmm.
and that and
No,
it also
I,
like allows me to grow more because the goal is very clear.
yeah, no, totally, and there it's an impressive amount of alignment. To wrap up, what is how would you summarize the takeaways from this conversation in terms of
Hmm,
food, like the rules of thumb? What are the quick actionable things that somebody can do to immediately
awesome,
start feeling? Yeah.
awesome. So the dosage makes the poison. Balance and flexibility is what it's all about. Analyze where you're lacking, what you need to increase, and what you need to decrease, and immediately you'll you'll feel better. And if I want to be even more concrete, drink more water, eat more fiber, eat more protein, try to limit the calorie dense foods to a little bit less, like portion control. Immediately you'll start feeling better. In terms of exercise, choose what you love to do, stick to it, and progressively overload and measure. Make sure you measure. What you don't measure, you cannot improve. So whatever it is, strength training, yoga, running, flexibility, just make sure you have a baseline. Start extremely low and just make sure you improve on it. And in terms of the last thing to talk about in life is grow, my friend, every single day, and then you won't be able to imagine where you are a year, 2 years, 5 years down the line.
Santiago, what a wonderful opportunity to have you. I look forward to doing this over and over, my friend.
Indeed, my friend, for many more years to come, maybe 150.
Hell yeah, hell yeah. That would be a joy. All right.
That
See
was
you next time.
see you, my friend.